Zohran Mamdani, thank you very much for being here. So Eric Adams is staying in the race. He announced that he is not going to take some other position he was reportedly being offered by Trump. Why do you think he's staying?
I cannot speak to Eric Adams' motivations or his interests. I can just tell you that it's been a lot of noise these last few weeks. And we've seen that this is the specialty of Donald Trump and his puppets. A lot of noise, few results. And all of it distracts from the fact that 1 in 4 New Yorkers are living in poverty in this city. And so often their concerns, their welfare has been secondary to the interests of these so-called leaders in trying to figure out their own futures.
Do you think Trump's involvement in this race at this point is helping you?
I think it's showcasing what's at stake, which is the fact that we have a vision to actually help New Yorkers afford their city. And Donald Trump has a vision to try and rip apart the very fabric of the city. He has passed legislation that will throw millions of New Yorkers off of their health care, ran a campaign on cheaper groceries, and is now cutting SNAP for hungry New Yorkers across the 5 boroughs.
What about when, Donald Trump has threatened to bring troops into New York? He's done it in Washington. He wants to do it in Baltimore, Chicago. If you're elected mayor, do you think that that's the first thing he's going to do? Because he's made it clear he's invested in what happens here. He's a longtime New York resident. He does not want to see you elected. If you are, do you expect that he'll get involved?
We will prepare for every eventuality. And I agree with what Commissioner Tisch of the NYPD said, which is that we do not need the National Guard here. The NYPD can create that public safety for New Yorkers. And we've seen an example of how to fight back against this federal overreach in California, where you had the governor, the mayor, the attorney general work together to file a lawsuit that a judge recently found that the federal government was illegally deploying the National Guard there. That's the kind of partnership we need to see in New York. And yet that's exactly the opposite of what we saw when Andrew Cuomo was leading the state.
So lawsuits would be your first step?
I think lawsuits. I also think the fact that we look at our own law department, which has been on the forefront of some of the most critical cases in the country, and yet it's staffed at pre-pandemic levels, not even at the level that it used to be before COVID. That needs to be brought up with 200 additional lawyers.
So in Baltimore, in the state of Maryland, just today, the mayor there and the governor, they're surging resources into the city to address crime, to address public safety. They're saying it's not anything to do with Donald Trump, but what are you going to do about public safety in New York? Is there a responsibility that you would have to actually make the city safer for New Yorkers, to address those concerns that are very real?
Absolutely. That is one of my primary responsibilities. And it's interesting that you actually mentioned Baltimore, because you can see in Baltimore that they've managed to bring down the number of homicides and shootings through an understanding of the very different tools you have to implement to actually confront the scourge of gun violence. Here in New York City, I would work alongside the NYPD to create that public safety and also invest in existing infrastructure we have here that is not at the full scale it could be. Infrastructure that has been shown to reduce shootings by up to 40%, and it goes by the name of the crisis management system.
You've said you wanted to debate Donald Trump. A lot of people ask the question, are you and Donald Trump more similar than maybe you might want to let on? And specifically on this issue of socialism, even Trump's own allies, his fellow Republicans like Rand Paul, have suggested that some of his policies are socialist in nature. He took a stake in Intel in exchange for U.S. government funding. People have called that socialist. Do you think that that's a good idea?
I think that Donald Trump and I have one thing in common, which is that we talk about the need for cheaper groceries. The difference between the two of us is that I'm actually going to deliver on that. And that's what I think is so frustrating, is that he spoke to the needs that New Yorkers had, that Americans had. They truly believed that his promise of a cheaper and a more affordable life was possible, but he's shown no interest in that. You look at his economic policies, they have exacerbated that crisis.
But first of all, do you think that there are some things that Trump has done that are more socialist than capitalist?
I don't think there is much that Donald Trump does that can be understood through the idea of ideology. I think he does whatever it is he decides to do each and every day with his own mind as the centerpiece of it.
On the rent stabilization, on the impact of your proposals on housing in this city, there's a lot of concern that it'll cause people to leave, that it'll cause, dilapidated housing, that it'll cause landlords to go out of business. But my question to you is, how interested are you in working with or talking to the private sector on some of these issues? Are you flexible in some of your views for what the solution might be to housing costs or what the solution might be to a lack of inventory? Or or do you think that they can't be part of the solution?
I think that every New Yorker can be part of the solution. And I am not only interested, but committed to having conversations with New Yorkers across the political spectrum. And I think for too long, leadership has been defined as someone who surrounds themselves with people who are quickest to say yes to each and every idea. You have to actually encourage and create space for disagreement, because that's what gets you the outcome of results. And when we talk about freezing the rent for the more than 2 million New Yorkers who live in rent-stabilized housing, that happened 3 times before under the previous mayoral administration. New York City is still standing.
A bigger picture question. Tom Suozzi, he's a representative from here in New York. He often talks about you and Trump in the same sentence. But the suggestion there is that you know how to diagnose a problem, which you have on housing, on food, on childcare. But the solution that you're offering is all too simple. It's overpromising and in ways that you cannot deliver. Is there a risk that you might overpromise New Yorkers on things that you can't execute on?
I would call him a colleague, because we are part of the same party, the Democratic Party. And as Ed Koch said, a former Democratic mayor of New York City, that if you agree with me on 9 out of 12 issues, vote for me. 12 out of 12, see a psychiatrist. We have to have room for disagreement within a party. Otherwise, we just become a monotone that doesn't accept the innate tension of people coming together. And this vision that we have for New York City, it's one that speaks to the scale of this crisis, much in the same way that when the former administration of New York City looked at childcare, they talked about developing universal pre-K. Many people thought that was unrealistic. Now it is a fact of life here in New York City. That is going to be the same, not only for freezing the rent, not only for making buses fast and free, but for universal childcare from 6 weeks to 5 years of age.
A lot of polls saying different things, but I think the gist of it is that, in the race as it stands now, you've probably got about a third of the electorate in the city. First of all, if it were a 2-man race between you and Cuomo, do you think for sure that you can win that race?
Absolutely. And I would tell you that I spent many months, including some where I was here on this show with you, where I was running for mayor in the Democratic primary, and we were told time and again it was inevitable that Andrew Cuomo was going to win the race. I was at 1% early in the spring of this same year, and then we won the race by 13 points with the most votes in primary history. So we are very confident about defeating Andrew Cuomo, just like we did in June. And what is outrageous to us is not the question of the implications of these machinations on the race. It's what they show, the blatant disregard that so many of these politicians have for the welfare of working class New Yorkers, 1 in 5 of whom can't even afford $2.90 to ride the bus.
Your democratic socialism has been just the center of everything that people talk about. But in this country, there's a big debate about the wealthy, the uber wealthy, the gap between the rich and the poor. Just this week, Tesla offered a pay package to Elon Musk that would potentially make him a trillionaire. Do you think trillionaires should exist?
I think the better question is whether working people should exist, because what we're seeing right now is amidst this incredible wealth, we have people who are keeping the city running that have to now live outside of the city, outside of the state. There are New Yorkers who are living in New Jersey and Pennsylvania and Connecticut because they just can't afford to live here. Amidst all of that, we have talk of trillionaires. I mean, it tells you where our political priorities are. And that's what is so frustrating, is that when we talk about the cuts to SNAP benefits here in New York City, the throwing of millions off of their health insurance, it's not just a incident that has taken place in Washington, D.C. It is a function of the largest wealth transfer we've ever seen in our history of our country's politics.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely take the point that this inequality has only increased in recent years. But we also live in a world, especially this city, where it is powered by businesses, by corporations that come here that hire people. Job numbers that came out just today indicating there's a slowdown across the country in hiring. Is now really the time to raise taxes on those corporations, but also to exacerbate the tensions between the rich and the poor? Or do we need each other to make this economy work?
We need each and every person in this city for the future that we all deserve. And what I would say is it's not politics or policy commitments that are exacerbating tensions. It's the fact of inequality. That's the tension that working class New Yorkers are living with, where they can't afford their rent, they can't
You
afford
don't
their
have
childcare.
any concerns about the broader economic environment and the impact of higher taxes on anybody, rich or poor, in this particular economy?
Let's talk about the revenue proposals. I've talked about increasing the state's top corporate tax rate to match that of New Jersey, increasing personal income taxes on the top 1% of New Yorkers. That's New Yorkers who make $1 million or more, they'd pay $20,000 extra in their personal income taxes. This would actually even benefit those same sets of New Yorkers and those corporations. Because when I speak to business leaders, they tell me they're having a struggle of attracting talent that can afford to live in the city because of the cost that we're seeing across the board. These are not proposals for the sake of raising revenue. They're proposals to fund affordability across these 5 boroughs. And that's critical, because otherwise we'll see an exodus that has already been taking place of hundreds of thousands of New Yorkers who just cannot afford this city anymore.
All right. Well, thank you very much, Sarun Mamdani. Thank you.
It's a real pleasure.